There comes a moment in life, often quietly, without warning, when something inside you just breaks. It's not an explosion. It's not dramatic. And it's not even something you can explain to others. It's not exactly sadness, and it's not quite anger either. It's something deeper, like your soul is whispering, I can't carry this anymore. You don't see it coming. There's no sign in the sky, no big announcement, no date circled on your calendar. But it arrives anyway, usually after years of holding on. After you've spent countless nights convincing yourself to be patient, telling yourself that things will get better. That maybe if you change a little more, if you try a little harder, if you just keep pretending everything's fine, one day it'll all fall into place. But deep down, something doesn't feel right. And no matter how much you try to ignore it, that heavy feeling in your chest won't leave. So you go on, dragging the weight of other people's expectations, staying in relationships that leave you empty, playing roles you've outgrown, trying to shrink yourself into spaces that no longer fit. Until one day, often in the middle of the smallest, most ordinary moment, you break. But not in the way people think. Not in a loud, falling apart kind of way. It's quiet. It's subtle. It's more like a soft, exhausted no more. And in that moment, something profound begins. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist, called this the beginning of individuation, the process of becoming your true self. The mask you've worn for years starts to slip. The version of you that was built for survival, built to please, built to belong, begins to dissolve. And in its place, someone new begins to emerge. Someone more honest, more real, more you. But this shift doesn't feel empowering at first. It feels terrifying. Because the truth is, letting go, truly letting go, doesn't just mean releasing a job, a person, or a situation. It means letting go of who you thought you were. And it's hard. So hard. You begin to wonder why it's so difficult to walk away from things that clearly hurt you. Why is it so hard to let go, even when your heart is screaming that something isn't right? Jung had an answer, one that stings a little when you hear it. He said that we often build our identity around our suffering. We tell ourselves stories to survive it, and over time, we begin to believe. You might not even notice you've done it, but somewhere along the line, you began to justify your pain. You said things like, that's just how life is. Or, maybe I deserve this. Or, what if I leave and end up alone? And your unconscious, your inner autopilot, took those beliefs and turned them into truth. So you stayed. In relationships that chipped away at you, in jobs that drained your spirit, in patterns that left you exhausted. And the saddest part? A part of you believed that was normal, that this is just life. But it's not. Because the soul, no matter how much pain it endures, is always seeking to grow. Always trying to return to its true self. And to do that, it has to shed everything that no longer fits. But this isn't an easy process. It's not clean or simple. It requires something many people spend their whole lives avoiding: the confrontation with your shadow. The shadow is every part of yourself you've been told to hide. The thoughts you don't speak, the feelings you push down, the truths you're too afraid to face, the desires you were shamed for, the anger you weren't allowed to express, the parts of you that, somewhere along the way, were labeled wrong. You learned to bury them, to fit in, to feel safe, to be loved. But buried things don't disappear. They find their way back in other forms, in repeated patterns, in unhealthy relationships, in the anxiety you can't explain, in the emotional exhaustion that doesn't go away. When you reach your breaking point, you're not just walking away from people or situations. You're facing that shadow, possibly for the first time. You're standing in front of all the parts of yourself you tried to avoid and saying, I see you now. It's painful. It's uncomfortable. And yes, it feels like a death, the death of the old self. The one who stayed small. The one who said yes when they wanted to say no. The one who kept peace at the cost of their own. At first, fear takes over. You'll doubt yourself. You'll think, what if I made a mistake? What if I go back? And many people do. They turn around and return to the life they tried to leave, not because it's better, but because it's familiar. The unknown is frightening. The comfort of old pain can feel safer than the risk of a new freedom. But fear, in this case, isn't a warning. It's a sign of change. It's your unconscious trying to pull you back into the known, into what it thinks is safe. But your soul? It wants more. And if you can stay with that discomfort, if you can resist the urge to go back, something incredible happens. You start to get your energy back. Piece by piece, you reclaim parts of yourself you didn't even know you'd lost. You begin to feel clearer, stronger. Things that once drained you no longer have the same hold. What used to hurt doesn't cut as deep. What you once thought you couldn't live without suddenly feels small. And from that space, a new kind of love begins to grow, the kind that comes from within. This self-love isn't loud or performative. It doesn't depend on someone else telling you that you're enough. It doesn't ask for permission. It's quiet, but unshakable. It says, I know who I am. I know what I deserve. I will no longer shrink to make others comfortable. I will no longer carry what was never mine to hold. And once you taste that love, that true, deep, internal self-love, everything begins to shift. You stop chasing people who don't see your worth. You stop settling for crumbs. You stop waiting for someone else to fix your life. Because now, you can save yourself. But the journey doesn't end there. With this new awareness comes a new way of seeing the world. You begin to notice the things you used to ignore, the red flags, the patterns, the subtle ways you used to betray yourself. It's like waking up from a long sleep. Suddenly, things that once felt normal now feel unbearable. You can no longer pretend. You can no longer go back to sleep. And perhaps the most powerful part of this whole journey is this. You start to see others more clearly, too. Not through the lens of who you hope they are, but for who they really are. You stop excusing harmful behavior. You stop giving energy to what doesn't give back. You stop needing anyone to complete you because you finally feel whole on your own. This is not an easy path. It requires honesty, courage, and a willingness to face parts of yourself that you've been avoiding for years. But once you begin, there's no turning back. And what lies ahead, on the other side of the fear, the loss, the uncertainty, is freedom. The kind of freedom that comes not from changing the world around you, but from finally coming home to yourself. For a long time, you believed that love could fix things. You believed that if you just gave more, tried harder, stayed patient, or proved your loyalty, then maybe, just maybe, the person you cared about would finally see you. That they'd realize your worth, that they'd change, that they'd give you the love and respect you so deeply hoped for. You weren't naive. You were hopeful. You saw their potential, not just their flaws. And so you held on. You told yourself that it was just a matter of time. That if you loved them the right way, they would become the person you needed them to be. But over time, something inside you began to shift. Slowly at first. Quietly. And then one day, you finally saw it for what it was. This was never your responsibility. It was never your job to carry their pain, to heal their wounds, to make them whole. You were trying to pour your love into a bottomless well, one that couldn't be filled because they weren't ready to receive it. Not because you weren't enough, but because they hadn't yet chosen to face themselves. Carl Jung once said that people who haven't confronted their own darkness, the hidden parts of themselves they don't want to acknowledge, will often project that darkness onto others. That means they don't just hurt you by accident. They hurt you because you were there, standing in front of their mirror. You reflected back to them everything they didn't want to see in themselves. And instead of dealing with that discomfort, they tried to control you, blame you, or break you. Maybe you were the one who kept trying to make it work. Maybe you stayed long after you knew the connection was hurting you. Maybe you thought that if you just stayed kind, if you stayed soft, if you stayed loyal, things would eventually shift. But now you understand something you didn't back then. You weren't put in their life to fix them. You were put there to learn how to stop abandoning yourself. For a while.
And when you finally said, enough, everything started to change. Maybe they got angry. Maybe they told you that you were the one who changed. Maybe they said you were cold, distant, selfish. Maybe you even started to wonder if they were right. But deep down, you knew the truth. You had changed. You had grown. You were no longer the version of yourself who tolerated being mistreated. You were no
Another
longer the
voice
person
speaks.
who confused
It's
love
quieter,
with
but
sacrifice.
steadier.
You had
It
finally
reminds
stopped
you that
apologizing
this
for your
emptiness
boundaries.
is not
You
punishment,
had started
it's
choosing
space.
yourself.
Sacred
Still,
space.
it wasn't
A
easy.
clean slate.
Because when
A
you let
place
go
where
of
something
someone
new
or
can
something
begin.
that was once
Jung
part of your
believed that
world,
before
it leaves
transformation
behind a
comes chaos.
silence,
That
a
when we
space.
grow, our old
And
world,
sometimes
the
that
one built on
emptiness
false
can
beliefs
feel
and
unbearable.
outdated patterns, begins to fall apart. That's why it feels so uncomfortable. The structures we once depended on no longer hold. The people we once clung to no longer understand us. But that discomfort? It's not a sign of failure. It's a sign of awakening. Even so, nostalgia will try to pull you back. You'll remember only the good moments. Your mind will replay the laughter, the smiles, the soft touches, and it will leave out the nights you cried yourself to sleep. The anxiety, the loneliness you felt even when they were right beside you. And that's the trick the past plays on us. It edits the memories to make us doubt our growth. But you didn't walk away on a whim. You walked away because staying was killing something in you. And now, for the first time, you're breathing again. It may be slow and shaky, but it's real. And with each breath, something inside you is rebuilding. You start to feel your energy return, the energy that you gave away in little pieces over the years. The energy you spent trying to fix, to explain, to forgive, to prove your worth. It doesn't come back all at once, but it comes. And as it does, you begin to feel different. You stop chasing love. You stop begging for attention. You stop explaining yourself to people who don't want to understand you. The fear shows up, too. Fear that you'll never find love again. Fear that you'll always be alone. Fear that you made a mistake. And yet, somewhere inside you, another voice speaks. It's quieter, but steadier. It reminds you that this emptiness is not punishment, it's space. Sacred space. A clean slate. A place where something new can begin. Jung believed that before transformation comes chaos. That when we grow, our old world, the one built on false beliefs and outdated patterns, begins to fall apart. That's why it feels so uncomfortable. The structures we once depended on no longer hold. The people we once clung to no longer understand us. But that discomfort? It's not a sign of failure. It's a sign of awakening. Even so, nostalgia will try to pull you back. You'll remember only the good moments. Your mind will replay the laughter, the smiles, the soft touches, and it will leave out the nights you cried yourself to sleep. The anxiety, the loneliness you felt even when they were right beside you. And that's the trick the past plays on us. It edits the memories to make us doubt our growth. But you didn't walk away on a whim. You walked away because staying was killing something in you. And now, for the first time, you're breathing again. It may be slow and shaky, but it's real. And with each breath, something inside you is rebuilding. You start to feel your energy return, the energy that you gave away in little pieces over the years. The energy you spent trying to fix, to explain, to forgive, to prove your worth. It doesn't come back all at once, but it comes. And as it does, you begin to feel different. You stop chasing love. You stop begging for attention. You stop explaining yourself to people who don't want to understand you. And suddenly, the world starts to shift around you. Not because it has changed, but because you have. You begin to attract different people. People who see you, who hear you, who respect your boundaries because they have their own. You start to notice that situations that once seemed normal now feel deeply wrong. You can no longer tolerate what you used to excuse. And it's not because you're bitter. It's because you've raised your standards. You've learned to recognize your value. But this isn't the final chapter. In fact, this is just the beginning. Because once you've said no more, once you've chosen to love yourself deeply, you'll face the next test, staying true to that choice. It's easy to choose yourself in moments of clarity. But life has a way of testing us in moments of doubt. The past might try to return, dressed in new clothes. The familiar might whisper promises it never kept before. And the mind might still wonder, what if I overreacted? What if I gave up too soon? But now you know better. You've seen too much, felt too much, grown too much. You know that the pain you left wasn't just a bad day, it was a pattern. A life that slowly drained you, little by little. And you've already decided. You won't go back. Jung said that once the psyche expands, it can't shrink back to its former state. And now, neither can you. You can't unlearn what you've learned. You can't unknow your worth. You can't return to a life that asked you to be less than who you are. So yes, the road ahead may still feel uncertain. There will still be lonely nights. Still moments of doubt. But now, there's also peace.
Clarity. Power.
Because you're not who you used to be. You're someone who has learned to stand alone. Someone who doesn't need to be rescued, because you've rescued yourself. Someone who no longer fears the emptiness, because you've discovered it's where truth lives. And as you continue on this path, life begins to meet you at your level. People come into your life not to take, but to share. Not to break you, but to grow with you. And it's not because you're lucky, it's because you're finally aligned with what you were always meant to have. You're no longer operating from fear. You're no longer acting from scarcity. You've stopped begging for love, now you radiate it. You've stopped settling for less, now you expect more, not just from others but from yourself. This is transformation. Not a moment, but a becoming. You've stopped trying to become what others needed and finally become who you were always meant to be. Not perfect, not finished, but real, whole,
awake.
There comes a time when something inside you quietly starts to shift. You don't notice it at first. You still wake up and go through the motions. You still smile at the right times and say the right things. But underneath it all, something begins to feel different. Things that used to feel okay suddenly feel heavy. Conversations that once brought you comfort now leave you tired. And the places you once tried so hard to fit into start to feel like tight spaces you've outgrown. You start realizing that anything that asks you to give up your peace doesn't belong in your life. Not just dramatic, toxic chaos, but even the quiet kind. The kind that slowly chips away at your energy. The kind that makes you doubt yourself. The kind that asks you to stay silent just to keep someone else comfortable. You begin to see that any relationship, romantic, family, friendship, that needs you to make yourself smaller in order to be loved is not love at all. It's a cage. A beautiful one, maybe. A familiar one. But still a cage. At first, you question yourself. You wonder if you're being too sensitive. You miss what you left. You miss the comfort, the familiarity, even the chaos. And you think that missing something must mean it was meant to stay. But the truth is, missing something doesn't always mean it belongs in your life. It just means your mind is adjusting. You're breaking free from emotional habits you've had for years. That ache in your chest? That's not a sign you've made the wrong choice. It's your body recalibrating. Your subconscious is trying to understand who you are now that you're no longer carrying what was never meant for you. You learn over time that the real sign of healing isn't found in how much pain you feel when you let go. It's in what you do with the space that pain leaves behind. Because letting go always creates a void. You lose the thing, the person, the story you were clinging to. And that emptiness, it can feel unbearable. So you'll be tempted to fill it. With a distraction. With something new. With something that feels safe and warm, even if it isn't right. But if you do that, if you run back to what's easy, you'll end up repeating the same lessons in different forms. But if you stay, if you sit in that space and you breathe through it and you let yourself feel the discomfort, you start to find something else. You find yourself. You begin to hear your own voice again. The one that got buried under everyone else's expectations. The one that's been whispering all along, even when you couldn't listen. You start asking different questions. Not, how do I keep this person? But what do I need? What actually feels right for me? And slowly, something changes. You stop looking for love out of desperation, and you start offering it from wholeness. Before, everything you did was shaped by fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of being wrong. Fear of being too much or not enough. But now, you begin to make choices from a calmer place. You're not begging anyone to see you anymore. You're not settling for the bare minimum just to feel wanted. You no longer need loud declarations or perfect timing. You begin to trust the quiet strength inside you. The ones who once held power over you feel it slipping. The ones who used to confuse your kindness for weakness start to realize they can't reach you in the same way anymore. And that strength, it starts to show. People around you notice, even if they don't understand it. Might try to come back not because they've changed, but because they sense that you have. Where you once broke under their silence, now you stand firm. Where they once got in through guilt, they now find the door locked. But your growth isn't about proving anyone wrong. You're not cold. You don't seek revenge. You simply know who you are now, and that knowing makes you immovable. You don't waste energy trying to convince others of your worth, because you've finally stopped doubting it yourself. This is what transformation really looks like. It's not always loud. It's not always pretty. Sometimes it's messy and lonely. Sometimes it's just you, sitting with yourself on a quiet night, remembering all the versions of you who fought so hard to be loved and feeling compassion for them, not shame. You see now that every time you ignored your intuition, you were choosing your own suffering. You weren't wrong for wanting love. You just didn't yet know that love isn't supposed to hurt like that. You remember how many times you silenced your own voice just to be accepted. You recall the moments you made excuses for the way someone treated you, thinking that if you were more understanding, more patient, more forgiving, they would finally see you. But they never did. Not fully. And now you understand that their ability to love you was never a reflection of your worth. It was a reflection of their capacity. And maybe the hardest part of all this is realizing that the pain you carried for so long wasn't yours to begin with. That all those years of feeling not enough came from trying to earn love in places where love was never freely given. And that's not your fault. You were doing the best you could with what you knew. But now you know better. Now you see the signs you used to ignore. Now you feel the shift. Carl Jung said that when we suppress the truth, our unconscious mind finds ways to bring it back up through dreams, anxiety, illness, restlessness. And maybe that's what was happening all along. You weren't broken. You were being nudged. Your spirit was trying to get your attention. And now that you've stopped running, now that you've sat in the silence and listened, you finally hear it. The truth that was always there. You were never too much. You were never asking for too much. You were simply in the wrong places with the wrong people for too long. And now that you know your worth, everything starts to shift. At first, it's subtle. You stop chasing clarity and start letting it come to you. You stop forcing connections that aren't aligned. You stop negotiating your boundaries. You begin to live differently, not because someone told you to, but because you finally remembered who you are. And some people won't recognize you anymore. They'll say you've changed. They're right. You're no longer available for things that drain you. You're no longer quiet when you should speak. You're no longer making space for people who never made space for you. And that's not arrogance, it's self-respect. You're not the same because you're no longer surviving. You're creating. You're choosing with intention. You're living in a way that honors your truth. You no longer confuse peace with boredom or chaos with passion. You've learned the difference between being needed and being loved. Now, your life reflects what you believe you deserve. And because you finally believe you deserve better, better is beginning to arrive. Not all at once. Not perfectly, but steadily, quietly, truthfully. And when you look back, you won't feel regret for what you let go. You'll feel gratitude for the lessons, for the growth, for the strength you didn't know you had. You'll see that you were never lost. You were just buried. And now, piece by piece, you've come home to yourself. That's the real meaning of self-love. Not perfection. Not ego. Just a quiet, unwavering decision to never abandon yourself again. There was a time when you walked into rooms and immediately started scanning the energy, not because you wanted to, but because you felt responsible for keeping everyone else comfortable. You kept your opinions soft, your truth small, your presence manageable. Not because you didn't have something to say, but because you had learned somewhere along the way that being agreeable meant being safe. That blending in meant being loved. You became a master at sensing what other people needed, even when it meant silencing what you needed yourself. But slowly, quietly, something inside you started pushing back. Maybe it began with a feeling you couldn't name, an ache in your chest when you said yes, even though you wanted to say no. A tiredness that rest couldn't fix. A moment in front of the mirror when you no longer recognized the person looking back. That's when you began to understand. Your soul had been speaking to you all along. It wasn't loud. It didn't scream, but it was persistent. It whispered in the background every time you chose someone else's comfort over your truth. And eventually you decided to stop ignoring it. You began to listen, not just to your mind, but to your body, to your instincts, to the deep knowing inside you. And that was the turning point. You realized that self-love isn't just a nice phrase on a coffee mug. It's not soft and sweet and easy. It's not bubble baths and affirmations, though those things can help. No, self-love is trust. It's the decision to believe that your feelings are valid even when no one else agrees. That your needs are real even when they inconvenience others. That your peace is sacred, and anything that threatens it doesn't belong in your life. You didn't become colder. You became clearer. Clear about what you would no longer tolerate. Clear about the kind of energy you'd allow into your space. Clear about the kind of love you would wait for, even if it meant walking alone for a while. And something amazing happened when you raised your standards, not by shouting about them, but by living them. The people who were only drawn to your wounds, to your need to be needed, began to fade. Not because you asked them to leave, but because your healing no longer made space for their chaos. And yes, it felt empty at first. That's the part no one really talks about. Letting go of toxic attachments leaves a silence behind, and that silence can feel like loneliness. There were moments when you missed what you knew, even though it hurt you. There were nights when you questioned yourself, wondering if you had made the wrong decision. But then you noticed something else, something softer, quieter. The peace. It wasn't loud like drama. It didn't rush in like intensity. It arrived slowly, like sunlight at dawn. And for the first time, you didn't have to chase it. You simply had to stop chasing everything else. That's when you began to understand the difference between love and attachment, between connection and control, between chemistry and alignment. You stopped needing to be understood by people who were committed to misunderstanding you. You stopped trying to earn space in rooms you were never meant to enter. You no longer explained away mistreatment. You no longer sacrificed yourself for the sake of being chosen. You realized that the only person who needed to choose you was you. And yes, some people didn't like the new you. They said you'd changed, that you were distant, cold, hard to reach. But what they didn't see was that you were finally within reach of yourself. For the first time, you weren't molding yourself into a version of you that made others comfortable. You were becoming who you always were beneath the people-pleasing, beneath the performance. You weren't shrinking anymore. You were expanding, and not everyone could come with you. You began to live differently. You stopped reacting to manipulation. You stopped confusing guilt for loyalty. You stopped giving your time and energy to people who only remembered your worth when they needed something from you. You stopped entertaining mixed signals, half-effort, and almost love. And in their place, you welcomed solitude, not as punishment, but as sanctuary. And something magical happened. Life began to respond. Not because everything became perfect, but because you started moving from a place of truth. You stopped forcing things. You stopped chasing things. You understood that what flows to you when you are aligned is meant for you. And what resists, what confuses, what pulls you out of your peace, that's your cue to let go. You learned to trust the flow. To release what doesn't move with you. To say no without guilt. To walk away without apology. And with that, clarity arrived. The clarity that says, I don't have to explain myself. I don't have to perform for love. I don't have to carry relationships that make me feel heavy. The clarity that says, I can be kind and still have boundaries. I can love and still leave. I can forgive and still choose distance. Your energy began to feel different, not just to others, but to yourself. You weren't trying so hard anymore. You weren't exhausted from pretending. You weren't holding your breath, waiting for someone else to give you permission to be okay. You were breathing freely, finally, because you were no longer living in reaction. You were living in creation. You were creating a life that felt like yours. Relationships that honored your truth. A future that matched your values, not your fears. The best part? You no longer want to go back. That version of you, the one who accepted less, who tolerated too much, who quieted her soul just to be liked, she no longer exists. And even if old temptations return, Even if familiar people come knocking with the same patterns in new packaging, you now have something they can't take away from you: awareness. The awareness that says, I remember who I was before I remembered myself, but I won't become her again. This is what it means to choose yourself. Not once, but over and over again. Especially in the moments when it's hard. Especially when it's lonely. Especially when the old pain feels more familiar than the new peace. Because you know what's on the other side of staying true to yourself. You've tasted it. You've felt it. And it's not something you're willing to lose again. That's the power of self-love. Not perfection. Not a life without pain. But a life where you finally know you'll never again abandon yourself for anyone or anything. And that changes everything. There was a time when you settled for less, when you allowed people and situations that didn't truly nurture or support you to stay in your life. You let others decide your worth, letting their opinions shape how you saw yourself. But then something shifted. You began to listen, not just to the noise around you, but to the quiet voice inside, the one your soul had been trying to speak all along. You learned to trust that voice, and with that trust came a realization so powerful it changed everything. Self-love isn't a place you arrive at. It's a journey you walk step by step, moment by moment. Imagine standing at a crossroads where the path behind you is littered with old patterns, relationships that drained you, expectations that weighed you down, and doubts that clouded your mind. On this day, you turn your back on those worn-out roads and choose a new direction, one paved by self-respect and clarity. You say no more to what harms you, to what doesn't serve your growth. And in doing so, a strange and wonderful thing happens. You realize there is no turning back. What once felt like a battle inside now becomes a calm certainty. The uncertainty fades because you no longer need anyone else to validate your worth. You know it. You feel it. You live it. This new understanding changes how the world responds to you. Life begins to mirror back the respect and love you've finally given yourself. It's not because you've suddenly become stronger in the traditional sense, but because you refuse to settle for less than you deserve. Your energy shifts in a way that's undeniable. People who once took advantage of your doubts and insecurities start to drift away, unable to hold onto someone who no longer fits their story. They try to pull you back into old roles of weakness, doubt, or pain, but they find you are no longer there. You've grown beyond that. And while this emptiness after letting go can be scary, it's also the space where new life begins. You remember moments when you questioned your choices, wondering if you had made a mistake. But then you come back to a truth that holds you steady. Self-love doesn't feel like a sudden burst of happiness or excitement. It feels like peace, the kind of peace you once chased in others but now find within yourself. It's a peace that isn't shaken by what others say or do, because you've come to understand that the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one with yourself. And that understanding changes everything. Even as you grow, challenges don't disappear. Temptations to return to old habits or familiar but harmful patterns still surface. Yet now, you can see clearly the difference between what is real and what is just an echo of the past. You no longer feel the need to justify or explain yourself to anyone because you carry your worth inside, unshakable and true. With this kind of self-love, your whole being shifts. You stop trying to impress others or seek their approval. You stop needing to be understood by everyone because you realize not everyone is ready to walk this path with you. Some may say you've changed, that you're not the person they once knew. And they're right. But you haven't changed to fit someone else's idea of you. You changed because you finally broke free from what was holding you back. Your energy now feels different, lighter, stronger, clearer. Things that used to hurt you no longer have the same hold. Manipulation no longer pulls you under. Guilt no longer drags you down. And when someone who's unsure of what they want tries to confuse you, you stand firm in your own desires and truths. This clarity becomes your power, the power you always had but never fully claimed. Life becomes simpler not because problems vanish, but because you know which battles matter and which don't. You no longer waste energy trying to prove your worth or force what isn't meant for you. You understand that if something doesn't flow easily, it's a sign, not a challenge to conquer. It's a sign that it's not your path. At this point, you realize you have no desire to go back to old ways. The choice is clear. Continue repeating painful patterns or dare to build a new reality, one rooted in love and respect for yourself. You've made your decision. Never again will you ignore your intuition or settle for less than you deserve. This decision is the beginning of true transformation. And it doesn't just change you, it changes everything around you. The people who enter your life shift. New opportunities, connections, and experiences come your way, reflecting the new you. This all starts with that one simple but powerful choice to honor yourself and demand the respect you deserve. Now, as you walk this path, remember this isn't just about you. Share this story with others who may still feel trapped in old cycles. What you've learned isn't just a lesson, it's a tool for transformation. By sharing it, you help build a community of people who choose to awaken, to leave behind what no longer serves them, and to step boldly into the life they deserve. So take a moment. Reflect on what part of this story touches your heart. Share it. Talk about where you are on your journey and what you've learned. And if this message resonates with you, pass it on. Because every time you do, you help someone else find their way to self-love and freedom too. Thank you for being here, for listening, and most of all, for having the courage to choose yourself. This is where your true journey begins, and from here, the possibilities are endless.